Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you this morning. We're excited you're here for our 11 o'clock service. If you don't know, if you just showed up this morning and you walked in, we split into two services. One of our goals for this year, at the beginning of the year, we laid out some things we wanted to pray about. And one was that we would see God double the number of people that come to our Sunday morning service. And so for those of you that were around the beginning of this year, we've sort of seen that happen already. We're not even at the end of the year yet. And the reason we want to do that is not because we're trying to trick people into a service. Is that we think it's really good for people to come together and to worship Jesus, to figure out what is the thing that matters most, and let's say the words and let's sing the words and let's put first things in their first place. Let's be taught and encouraged a little bit. And the idea of that with our teaching and preaching is that we just want to teach people what the good news of Jesus means and how it applies in our lives. And then we want to be the people that say, you can do it. And we want to encourage you to go out there and live that life a little bit at a time, better and better. None of us are perfect. And it's a great place to come and make friends and to have high fives and to have somebody happy to see you every week. So our thought was this: that is not the only way people become followers of Jesus. That is not the only thing that contributes to people growing and becoming the followers of Jesus we're meant to be, but it's good, right? It's better to have that than not have it. And so since it's good, we said we really want to do whatever it takes to create space to keep inviting our friends and family so they can be a part of that. So anyway, we're excited to be in two services. November 20th, Jackie mentioned it, but it's our For Hartsville Sunday. It is a day we're going to do something cool for people that want to give. Now, here's the trick. If you are passionate about the vision that we have and you believe God's leading you to give, then we want you to give, because it's going to be like I think it's going to be a great blessing to you to be able to give. But if you don't, we still want you to come, okay? And so that day, we're going to cast a vision for how we can be for Hartsville in a way that is Jesus-centered, that gives life, that reverses the trend with the next generation that's walking away from church. We want to cast a vision how we can be for Hartsville for people that are hurting, for people that are lonely and isolated. And so we want you to bring your friends and family, and they can come for the first time. They will not feel out of place if they don't give. I promise, okay? We'll make it really easy. Now, for those that do give on that Sunday, we're going to do something really cool. Is we're going to have a way for you to write down your prayer for what will happen one day in that building on something that's going to be permanent. And we're going to take that and we're going to put it in the building. We'll tell you more about it as we get closer. And here's what you're going to be able to do. Think of the person, maybe it's a child or a grandchild or your coworker or who knows who it is, and your greatest prayer, what you're begging God to do in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And you'll be able to write that down, and we're going to put it somewhere in the building where here's what you'll be able to do one day whenever God answers that prayer and does something great in their life. You'll be able to walk them in that building, and you'll be able to point to a spot where your prayer is still written down, and you'll be able to say, not only did I pray for you, I gave for you. And it's going to be a great moment to see God sort of bring that full circle. So we're excited about that. Again, for Hartsville Sunday. And afterwards, we'll have a big celebration and stuff for kids to do. It's going to be great. And so anyway, it'll be really cool. All right, here's where we're landing today. A problem that everybody faces at some point in life is the purpose problem. It's like, what's the purpose of my life? You know, we want there to be meaning, and we want to feel like our lives count for something. But everybody, I don't care how successful you appear or how successful you are, all of us at some point in life look back over the last year, the last decade, the last week, maybe our whole life, and we're like, am I wasting it? You know, it seems like there should be more to life than this. It seems like there should be greater meaning than this and greater purpose than this. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to share one tip, one thing that all of us can do that I really do believe will help us if we do it, and it's going to be simple. If we do it, I think it's the kind of thing that when we ask ourselves that question, have I wasted my life or have I used it? We will be able to look back and say, I have used it. And what comes along with that is when you're like your heart overflowing with gratitude, because those are the things that matter the most. And then what we'll be able to say is that I don't know where you stand financially, but that you will really be a rich man or a rich woman who has spent their life well in something that counts. And there is nothing, I think, that we want more than that. So today, we're going to share how to do that. Okay, now, one thing I get to hear a lot, or I hear a lot, is this. Is I hear people in our church say, I love what y'all do, right? I love what y'all do. And then I'll say, oh, pause. Like, I love what we do. You know, we're part of this team together. And so then they'll usually say, well, I can't do what you do, which maybe is true or maybe not. But I can't do what you do. And the idea is this, is that the most meaningful ministry is done from the stage. And that everything else is somehow less meaningful than that. Well, today I want to tell you about the most meaningful ministry I've ever done in my life. And it was before I was a pastor. I'm going to tell you about the most meaningful. When I look back, I'm being dead serious. When I look back over my life, the ministry that means the most to me, that makes like my eyes sort of start sweating. You know what I mean? When I think about it, I'm just so grateful that I was able to do that. And I look back on it, and when I think back on it, and I'm not any better than anybody else, but when I think back on it, my heart overflows. In fact, you heard Tiffany, okay? Maybe one of the reasons that she said, I heard the passion that Jimmy had. Well, this is like, a few years later. At that time, I was just a Sunday school teacher. I was a Sunday school teacher. Like, there's no difference between those things. I'm just like y'all, and today, if you think that the ministry done on the stage is more important, I'm just telling you it's not. And I've had a chance to do all kinds of great ministry, not because I'm better than anybody else. Like, every once in a while, like the blind squirrel finds the nut, right? We accidentally stumble into something. And I have had opportunities in my life to do things that, looking back, are meaningful. I've had opportunities to work with teenagers. And that fires me up. I mean, that fills my cup to be able to serve with teenagers. But I'm going to be honest, that's not the most meaningful ministry I've done. I've had chances before one church. I was able to lead like a kids' church program. My child was in there and able to teach children about Jesus in a way they understood and see that grow and be healthy and good things come out of that. And that was great, but it is not the most meaningful ministry I've done. I was able to be a part of a small group that helped dream of launch one church. And by the way, if you're here now, one day we'll look back and we'll say, before we had a building, and you'll be able to say, I was part of one church at the beginning. I really do believe we'll all say that. And so we're all sort of co-founders of this thing, okay? But we were able to sit in the initial planning and dreaming of one church. Man, what a privilege that is. Like, I can't believe what's happened. But it is not the most meaningful ministry of my life. I've been able to preach and teach now in front of thousands of different people, different individuals. And that's such a privilege. I mean, it's terrifying. But to tell people, man, God's actually for you, and there's forgiveness and there's freedom, and believe it or not, God is the biggest fan of the humanity project, of humans. He loves you. And there's a purpose for your life, and there's meaning for your life. And to be the cheerleader on the stage that's been able to say to all those people, you can do it. Like, that is such a privilege. But it is not the most meaningful ministry of my life. So I want to tell you what it is in just a minute. The most meaningful thing I've done in my life, besides being a father and a husband. And it's something that every person in this room can do. And I will make a guarantee. If you do it, you won't regret it. If you do it, you'll look back years later, like I look back on a season of my life, and you'll be full of gratitude. We're going to look in the book of Acts and get a picture of this. It's Acts chapter 2. It's one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. It's the story of the early church, and it's a picture of what happened 2,000 years ago when a small group of people started a chain reaction that would turn the world upside down. So if you ever wonder, can we have an impact in the world? Well, it's not if a small group of people can have an impact. We see a picture of how they did. And you don't have to believe in Jesus or have faith. This is history, okay? History shows there were a small group of people, many of them women and slaves, which were looked down on in this time, that began following Jesus. And we're going to see a snapshot of what they were doing with their lives. And they would change the world, or Jesus working through them would change the world. And so what they did, maybe we would be wise to copy. So Acts chapter 2, we're going to start with verse 42. And if you're into history, this is cool because it appears there was a wealthy man named Theophilus that hired Luke to go back and research how the Jesus movement exploded before it was too late, while people were still alive to give firsthand accounts. So the first letter that Luke wrote, the first book that Luke wrote, was the book called Luke. It's in your Bible. It's about the story of Jesus' life. And then it appears he paid him some more money. He's like, listen, I want to fund you for the next 6 months or a year or who knows how long, Theophilus, and I want you to go back and keep interviewing, and I want to get the story of how the church exploded. Because we need to know this while it's still firsthand and while there's still people alive that remember it. So Luke went back and he researched and he talked to people and he wrote the book of Acts. And this is part of what he wrote about the small group of people who would see the world turned upside down before the end of their life. Verse 42, it says this. He said in Acts chapter 2, verse 42, they devoted themselves. And what that word means is there was some commitment. You know, I told you the blind squirrel finds the nuts sometimes. And in life, some of the things I'm most thankful for are things that I've stumbled into. But the concept here is intentionality. There was some on-purposefulness. Yes, God blessed them. Yes, God let them accidentally run into things that were like such great blessings in their life. But what they're getting ready to say is these things were on purpose. These things were scheduled. They weren't accidental. They were things that were intentionally pursued. It says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. And then there comes that comma, and what it's going to do is describe what the fellowship looked like. It says the fellowship looked like this, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And so what he says is, here's what the early church looked like. They were all in. They were really committed to two things. One was to be taught and to be encouraged. To come together in big groups and to be taught and encouraged. Maybe you could say it's like this. One of the things that we're passionate about as a church is setting a stage where you can invite your unchurched and your de-churched and your hurt churched and your not believing and you're not sure if they believe friends. And we're going to set the stage in such a way that it makes sense to our culture so we can communicate the good news of Jesus in a way that your kids and your grandkids and your coworkers and your cousin and the person you think is never going to come back to church, that in a way that would make sense to them. And this matters, right? So we're setting the stage. And so they were committed to teaching, to being encouraged, to learning more and more and more what it means that Jesus died for their sins on the cross and he rose on the third day. And now we're a part of that movement. And that's not where it stopped. It says it was teaching and fellowship. So here's my thought for today, and I'll tell you a little bit about it as we go. The most meaningful ministry of my life has been a meal served to people in my house who are hurting. Period. Now maybe there's a close second, but I don't really even know if it's close. When I look back on my adult life, the things I'm most thankful that I did, the things that when I think back on a season of my life where my heart overflows with gratitude, is a season where there were some people in our lives that were hurting. And we would invite them over to our house and serve them food and would stay up and talk and drink coffee and laugh and maybe shed a tear or two. And it's the most special thing I've ever been a part of. As much as this is amazing and this moment is awesome, it was the best. It was a season where in our life we didn't have a whole lot. I don't know if not everybody's had those seasons because we're Americans. I mean, thank God. But it was a season where I took a job and what I was promised, well, it ended up being cut by $10,000. And in the same time, my wife was sick and she had a family member to take care of, and so now we're a single income family making $10,000 less than we thought just one part of the income would be, and basically we were broke. But we were broke financially, but I'm telling you, in the ways that matter most, that was the richest season of my life. That was the season when we became, hey, let me tell you a few things that happened during that season. That's when I quit drinking soft drinks. You know why? Because water's free. Some of y'all that have been around for a while know people pick at us for serving hot dogs, which we don't do as much anymore, so you should give us a break. But the reason we serve hot dogs is because we had no money. And there were people that we needed to invite over. And in some ways it was the most poor. You could look at us and say that was the poorest you've ever been, and I would counter that and say it was the richest we've ever been. Because it was a season when people came to our home. I want to read the rest of this, and then what I want to do is I want to tell you how you can be rich. I want to tell you how your heart can be overflowing, how you can do ministry, and some practical tips, how you can do ministry in a way that when you look back on your life, you will think back on those times and know that your life was well spent. And there are things that you can bring to mind that may cause your eyes to sweat a little bit if you're a nostalgic person or an emotional person. But you will be so overflowing with gratitude. And every minister can do this. And every one of you that are followers of Jesus, that's you. And what you do in your home, you can believe me or not, this is awesome. Candlelight service, preaching the good news of Jesus in front of Center Theater, packed to the rafters full of people, is awesome. Easter services have been great. The stories and looking back have been so much fun. But the most meaningful ministry of my life has been over meals, and you can do it too. And God can use us mightily if we'll say yes to that. Okay, so he goes on. He says, they devoted themselves to teaching and to fellowship, not neglecting one or the other because they're both important, but the teaching and the fellowship, and to the breaking of bread and prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. And I am convinced if we'll buy into what we're going to talk about today, our whole community will be looking at us wondering what in the world is happening there. Like, I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand the forgiveness I see. I don't understand the generosity I see. Everyone was looking on with awe at all they were doing. Verse 44, all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. That's the big stage. So early in the church, they didn't have church buildings. So what they would do is they would meet in big groups in the temple courts. They would find a little platform to stand on. And so they would set the stage to bring people to hear the good news of Jesus, and somebody that could teach or preach, somebody that had the gift of communication and all these things. So that was the big stage. Now, the reason that's important, one is it's what they did. And it's good for us to all come together as a big group and for us all of us to encourage each other with all of our gifts. It's good for all of us to come together and to worship Jesus, right? We're supposed to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And when image bearers praise the King, like the one who died on the cross for them, that looks like heaven. In fact, I think it changes things around us to be more like heaven. So they would set the stage. And we're in a season where we're setting the stage. We're looking at doing that in a new way, in a new building. But I don't want us to forget about the other thing, which is the fellowship. So it says they would come together in the temple courts. They would set the stage. And in our culture, here's another reason this is important. In our culture, this is probably the gateway for people that are hurting many times. Because here's why. Because at least we have enough Christianity sort of left over that when tragedy strikes, and then when you have nowhere else to turn in life, at least they're going to remember Grandma talking about church. And they may show up at a place where we set the stage that makes sense for unchurched and dechurched people. But we can't stop there. So it says they would meet together in the temple courts, and they would sell other stuff, meet together in the temple courts, praising God and enjoying favor. I just skipped a whole verse there, but it'll be okay. Okay, we're in Acts chapter 2. Where am I at? There we go. Verse 46. They met together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Verse 47. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. There's a lot of people that hate on Christians. But I have a hard time imagining they would hate on our hospitality if we did it well. They may hate on other things, but it's hard to hate on sincere hospitality. So it says, all the people, they had favor with all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I want to lay out for you a vision of how you can do this. If you want to, like, these are some, you can put in some work that I think will help us all make the most of our lives. And now we're all designed to do ministry in different ways. Some of you are artists, and some of you are great with kids, and some of you are musicians, and some of you are teachers, and some of you are servers, and some of you know how to fix things. You know, we all have different things we're good at. But looking at you, I'm pretty sure we all eat. So this is a ministry we can share in common. And here's some ways we can do it. Now, what I'm talking about is not eating food. Because you can eat food and it doesn't count as this, okay? I'm talking about a meal, and I want to lay out a vision for how we can serve meals in a way that will be great ministry. How we can set the stage so that we can come together and bring unchurched and dechurched people to a place like this or better, okay? And teach them about Jesus, but we can also set our tables so that your homes become an extension of the church. Jesus people, your home's already an extension of the church. It's just probably not being used for it. And so it's not like we don't have any church buildings. We have hundreds of church buildings in this room. We're just going to build a new one for us all to meet out on Sundays and worship and celebrate. But like we have hundreds of church buildings in this room. Okay, so here's some ways you can do it. Here's some reasons that meals are powerful. And before I get there, one of the things we see in the life of Jesus in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is we see like many stories about Jesus serving meals. And I want you to think about this. Let's say you're Matthew. He wrote the book of Matthew, okay? And so what Matthew did is he looked back on his time with Jesus and he said, I better record this story. I better record the highlights. So when you read the Gospels, they are not video recordings, okay? It's not like Jesus wakes up at 7:37. Use his restroom, okay? It's not like a log of everything he did. When you read the Gospels, what you're reading is you're reading what people, I believe led by God's Spirit, but what people thought was the most important things, the most meaningful things, which again is where we get purpose. And by the way, for some of you going through tragedy right now, and all of us go through tragedy, the thing that can counter the weight, the thing that can stand up against the tragedy of life in some ways is meaning and is purpose. I think that's found through Jesus. But what I'm going to talk about is Matthew, when he wrote the Gospel of Matthew, wrote down the things that were most meaningful, the things that he remembered the most. And several of those were meals that Jesus served. One of my favorites was Jesus. This is after the resurrection. They're out, the disciples are out in a boat, and Jesus is on the seashore, and they see Jesus. And what has he done? But he has made like a charcoal fire pit so that Jesus can grill fish for the disciples. And you know what? Matthew saw a lot of amazing things, but apparently that episode of Jesus serving him a meal must have made his top 25 because it made it into the Gospel of Matthew. Another one was this. In 2 weeks, we're going to do communion, Lord's Supper. It depends on your background, what you call it. But it's this meal that Jesus instituted, full of symbolism, that if we were to lean into it, it would wreck us in such a good way. It would reorient us in such a good way, and I believe it will. So November 13th, mark your calendars. Okay, we're going to do that, and I believe it's going to be so powerful. But at this meal Jesus served, which, by the way, makes it into the Gospels repeatedly because it mattered, Jesus serves his disciples a meal. So here's some things you can do. Let's make it practical, and we're going to get out of here in like 10 minutes, so we better get on focus, Jimmy. Here we go. You ready? Number one is this. Here's why meals matter. One is because a meal is a sacrifice. Think about through human history. Most humans were on the edge of starvation. We're the few fortunate ones. But most humans down through history have lived their lives on the edge of starvation. And so what did it mean when a person who would live their lives on the edge of starvation would offer their food to someone else? It was sacrifice. It was love, and you can't love without giving, okay? It was sacrifice. And I think that's sort of carried over, and we know that deep down inside. And when you serve a meal to somebody, it is a sacrifice because it costs you something. Now, some of us are so wealthy that it's not even a blip on the radar. You know, I think back on that time in my life when it was the most meaningful. I'm not sure it wouldn't have been as meaningful if things wouldn't have been so tight for us. Because it was a sacrifice. You know what I mean? It was something that hurt a little bit. That like, you know, can we afford to do this? But meal, that's the concept of a meal. At least those of you that are so wealthy God, that's great. That's not a curse. If God's made you wealthy, He's done it on purpose so that you can leverage that to live a meaningful life that says your kingdom come, your will be done through all the resources that God's given you. But when we serve meals, it's giving something to somebody else. And even if we're so wealthy that it's sort of symbolic, that matters because we're made to look like Jesus people. Jesus not only died on the cross to pay for our sins and to win a victory over death and sin itself, Jesus came to show us how to be human. And we see over and over again that Jesus served meals. And so serving is a sacrifice. Now, here's a thought. For some of you that don't, last week we talked about margin. And we said that you can only be a cheerful giver if you have margin in your life, right? Which takes some self-discipline to have margin. So for example, if you're tight and you hear what I'm saying and you go out this week and you invite somebody to your house and you serve them filet mignon. That's expensive if you don't know, okay? If you serve them filet mignon, let me tell you something. One is you will not be able to do it cheerfully. Or if you do, you will not be able to do it again. And because you don't have margin. And so it's wise for us to create margin in our lives. And sometimes some of us in here, including the Beck household, we're sort of tight on money. We would say that for us to invite people over, we're going to have to say no to something else. It's a sacrifice, Jesus people. And that's one of the things that makes it so worthwhile. Number two is this. When you serve a meal, you serve people. Like you actually get to serve them. You get to put some work in. You set the table, right? You prepare the meal. You pour their glass. You wash the dishes. You say, well, that doesn't matter. Well, if it doesn't matter, why does it seem to be that the most important, the pinnacle of the gospel stories, other than the crucifixion, was when Jesus washed his disciples' feet before the meal that he instituted? Like, why is that such a big deal when Jesus washed his disciples' feet? Because we're made to serve. And when we can serve in small ways, we look like Jesus and it makes a difference. And number three is this. Whenever we serve meals like this, it's an opportunity to sacrifice. We're asking our church family, those that want to. If you don't want to, you don't need to, I promise. But for those that want to, we're going to sacrifice so we can set a stage. The Beck family is going to sacrifice. We've been talking about it. We're going to go without something. I don't know what. It won't be food, okay? It'll be something. It'll be an extra. We're going to go without something so we can give and we can sacrifice to set a stage. But we should also do the same thing so we can set a table in our family, in our house, for people that are hurting. And it's a way that we can serve. And number three is this. The Jesus meals, I think, always lead to Jesus stories. And you say, I'm not good at that. How about this? Here's how you can tell a Jesus story. Can you talk about a time that you went through something difficult? Because those are the conversations that go places. When you tell about the tests that you've gone through that in some way, somehow end up you telling about a testimony about how good God is. And you say, I'm not good with that. I'm not like a preacher. You don't need to be. But I'm going to tell you, there is nothing more meaningful than when you will sacrifice to bring people into your home and you will serve them, and then you begin to open your heart up after the meal over coffee or whatever you do and tell stories about your life and about what God's done and about what you've been through. That kind of ministry, it's magic. It's what we're made for. And I can stand in front of you and say, I am so thankful for the privilege to be able to teach and preach. And this is great. But the most meaningful thing I've ever done has been with 4 people around a table. And what if all of us can have meaningful ministries? What if we can change the paradigm where it's not that the pastor has a ministry and I'm bought into his ministry? No. What if we're all ministers? And we'll set a stage and we'll do what it takes to set the stage for unchurched and hurt people, but we'll also be ministers that set our tables. And what if one day you'll look back and you'll say, let me tell you about the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life. And they'll say, let me guess. It's when you got the promotion. You say, guess again. And they'll guess. It's when you traveled and you went on this vacation and that's all good. And you say, no, guess again. And you'll be able to tell them the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life is when I stepped into the ministry of serving meals like Jesus did. Now, your story may be different. I can't guarantee it, but what I can see is this, is that the early church committed themselves to 2 things. One is teaching. One is somebody saying, this is who you are. This is who God is. This is what God wants for your life now. You can do it. You know, where you get the pat on the back, where somebody says, I believe in you because God believes in you, and here's what you can do this week, and and you can walk out and feel encouraged. But the other part that seems to be equally important is if a church will buy into being people that step into the ministry of serving meals. And we see an early church comprised mostly of women and slaves who were looked down on in that culture, that within just a few decades would change the world. In fact, they would change the world so much that Theophilus would pay Luke to go talk to the now elderly people who were part of the story. And can you imagine this? They would say, Luke, let me tell you what we did. And let me tell you what we've seen happen. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could do the same thing? And I think we can. I think it's what God's called us to do. And so what I want to do is, for those of you Jesus followers that are willing to do it, I sort of want to deputize you, Whenever you get ordained, I don't know if you're familiar with that, it's like people saying you're ordained, you're qualified, you're called out. I want to ordain all of you to step into the ministry of using your meals. You all eat anyway, so we might as well do it. And I want to give you one more practical tip, and then we're going to stop. Here's who you invite. There's 2 groups of people. Number 1 is hurting people. Followers of Jesus, what if we'll begin to really have a radar for hurting people? And when you hear somebody say, I don't know what to do, I don't know anybody, I don't know where to go, I've just lost my loved one, I've just lost my job, I'm new to town and I don't have any friends, things in my life are chaotic, I've got a kid and I don't know what to do, life is stressful. What if all of us, as soon as we heard that, it's like, that's a person I need to connect with. That's a person, listen, that is a person that either I need to invite to a place where a stage is set to tell them about the good news of Jesus, or I need to invite them to a place where a table has been set, or maybe both. And you can invite hurting people. And what if we began to we trained ourselves so that when we realize that people are hurting, we're going to invite them to a place where a stage is set or a table is set. You would embark on a ministry in your life that would be so profound, it's hard to imagine. And the other group of people is this. It's people that God highlights in your life. Now, I preached on this about 3 years ago. So I'm going to save it. It's like a year from now. I'm going to spend a whole Sunday on this. But what if we began to pay attention to the people that just came to mind? What if we began to pay attention to the people that God sort of draws our attention to? And we began to think, if God draws my attention to them, it may be for a reason. Maybe that's a person who needs help. Maybe that's a person who needs fellowship. And if we were to deputize our whole church, if we were to ordain our whole church as ministers of meals, and we said, okay, I'm going to be on the lookout for anybody in my life that is hurting and anybody in my life that God highlights. Like, those are the people we should invite to church meetings. We should invite to a place where a stage is set. Or invite to a place where a table is set. And if we said, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. God, show me the people that you want to highlight. Put the hurting people in my life. Man, we would be so rich in meaning and so rich in purpose. It's so rich, and one day we'd be able to look back like the people that Luke talked to and say, I've lived a good life. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you what I've been able to be a part of, because we devoted ourselves to teaching and to fellowship. And I began to realize that I can be a minister through the meals that I serve in my house. Maybe you're a teenager and you say, I can't do that. Well, you can do this by go and sit with the person in the cafeteria that nobody's sitting with. Or maybe it's the person that God highlights to you in the hallway and you just feel like something's off. Like, you can go sit with them and you can do ministry through your meals. Like, all of us can. And I just believe that if we would do this, if we would get serious about making the sacrifices necessary to set a stage and to set tables, if we would get serious about serving people in simple ways, and about when the opportunity comes up, telling the stories about the times in our life that we've gone through the deepest, darkest, toughest things, but God's brought us through them, man, our lives would be so rich. And that's what I want for us. And I believe that if we were to get serious about setting a stage and setting tables, we would see God turn our community upside down. And I don't care if it's through one church. I could care less if it's through this thing. Guys, but what I know is what I want for you, and listen, what I want for me too, because I want to do this more. I would love to become an addict for this. You know, we're all addicted to something, aren't we? TV, food, milk, whatever. I would love for this to be such a rhythm of my life again. So I'm talking to me too. But I believe that if we were to do this, we would see God do amazing things. So I want to ask you to stand. Here's what I'm going to do. I want to pray over you. You can stand. Yep, good. I'm going to pray over you. Now, if you say, I'm not a Jesus follower and I think this is stupid, I don't want to pray over you without your permission. Like, I'm being serious, okay? So just go ahead and tell God you're not interested in this, okay? But for everybody else, I would sort of like to ordain you, follower of Jesus, to become a minister that uses these kind of things in your life. So that when you look back on your life and you wonder, like, did I waste it? Was I ever used for anything significant? The answer will be, yes, you were. Like, yes, you were, to the point that if not on earth and heaven or in new creation, somebody's going to come and ask you for the story of what you did with your life. And you'll be like, come here, Luke, sit down. It's going to take a while, you know? I've got some good stories to tell. And so I want to pray over you, all the people in the room that want to step into that something that's so meaningful as that, and that we would do that together. So I want to pray over you. I want to sort of think of yourself as being ordained into this. Father, I pray over every person in this room that will say yes to being a minister that will use the opportunities you've given them to help hurting and highlighted people. I pray that the greatest ministry of our lives, Father, would still be ahead of us. Father, I pray that every person in this room would realize that the person on stage, the ministry I get to do is no more important. It's not only more important, not more important, it's not more meaningful. It's not more significant. It's not, God, it's such a great story you're going to carve out for their lives. I pray that we would each realize the ministry you've given us, Father, is great. And help us to invite every hurting person and every person that's highlighted by you, either to a place where we set the stage or to a place where we'll set a table and we'll sacrifice for them and we'll serve them and we'll tell them our Jesus stories. And our cups will overflow with gratitude that you've allowed us to be part of your plan for your kingdom come, your will be done. I pray that you'd help us to do it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, two things.